Before we carry on, I want to ask you a big favor. Please subscribe to our podcast channels and on YouTube as well. This will help us to grow the channel and get more guests on board for better interviews and more information. Thank you and enjoy the show. Lara, thank you for taking the time to sit with me having a conversation on the Context Pod. I think we must start with the question where you tell us a bit about yourself, you being into business, you being into the environment, you being into sport. I'm going to leave you to it and you can tell us.
Yeah, well, first, thank you, Ettienne. Thanks for inviting me to talk a little bit about myself, about Conservio, about the whole kind of journey getting here. Yeah, I'm super excited to be on this podcast with you and chatting through everything. But yeah, I think in a nutshell, in terms of myself and kind of a little bit about me. So obviously my name is Lara, born and bred South African, very proudly South African, but I think even more than that, and I think this kind of contextualizes a little bit as well, but I'm very proudly African. I'm super energized by the continent, about the opportunities here, about building business here. It's something that like I think I feel quite strongly and forms quite a lot of my kind of journey as well. But I'm a lover of the outdoors, big lover of nature, being active, getting out there. I think that's kind of fed into a lot of travel as well. Um, and yeah, like you mentioned, I'm a competitive sportswoman. I played sports competitively throughout my life. It's taken me amazing places, kind of scholarships overseas to America, playing in clubs in Australia. My main sport kind of being water polo, and then that moving into, I still play water polo, but a bit of trail running. I'm now doing a little bit of paddle and things like that. It's kind of something that's always been part of what I do. And then I think the main thing as well is that I'm passionate about conservation. Conservation is a huge driver in, and it kind of like underpins a lot of my decision making. It led me to do my MBA at the African Leadership University in Rwanda with a specialization in the business of conservation. So it's really informed quite a lot of what I've done, and really just underpins kind of like my drive and my purpose. And then, yeah, the co-founder of Conservio. So I co-founded Conservio alongside a Dutch guy called Justin, who shares a lot of these similar interests. I think he would probably answer a lot of these questions the same way. And we co-founded Conservio about 4 years ago. And that kind of is the journey that brings us here now.
I think that's something that's interesting, and we'll get to the point where I think there's a big link between the love of sport and the love of nature. And
Mm.
this is where I want to head to now and ask you, where did this obsession and absolute love for nature came from? Where did it start? Is there a peg in the sand that you can put in and you can say, this is where the love of nature started? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when I think about growing up as well. I had a very charmed life in terms of there was a lot of experience, and I think my parents are very outdoorsy. Like I mean, every evening you're either going for a walk in the forest or to the dam, or you're going a walk in the mountains. We spent a lot of weekends camping getaways. It was nothing extravagant, but it was very rich in experience. And that experience always had something to do with nature. So there was a lot of adventure in that. So I think that shaped a lot of my childhood. Like I think about going down the Orange River with my parents, or going to the Kalahari and camping with my parents. Like that was very much how we kind of did things. A lot of local adventurous travel, overnight hikes, and all of that. So I think it's just nature's always been part of my how I found joy, or how we kind of connected as a family. So it was very much part of that fabric. And then the conservation came a little bit later. That came with my first job was for a company called Classic Portfolio, and they essentially do all the business strategy for really kind of top end pioneering conservation tourism businesses across Africa. And what that did is that it allowed me to travel all over Africa. So to the Congo, Kenya, Tanzania, to Sao Tome and Principe, which is off the west coast of Africa, to Namibia, to kind of like very deep areas. And that just kind of blew the whole thing wide open. It was like almost that I really understood conservation and understood nature, not just as nature, but as something that in order for it to be that way, it has to be protected. It has to be preserved. These kind of childhood memories and things I've enjoyed my whole life so simply and so easily is actually takes work. And there's a lot of thought that needs to go into it in order for it to stay that way. And I think when I started making all of these connections and seeing these areas, and not just seeing areas, but seeing communities, culture, economics, commerce, all of this kind of local economies built around conservation, it was just almost like it became something I couldn't unknow. I couldn't like unsee it. So it became like this kind of, now it was hugely part of my motivation. It's like, yeah, it's exactly what you say. It did become an obsession. It is an obsession. It was this is what now drove me, is like this almost this big understanding of things. And now is kind of the thing that I wanted to take going forward. I very much knew after those first trips and starting to see and really understand this kind of conservation landscape in Africa that it was something I wanted to do. It's something I wanted to create and contribute to.
With you traveling over Africa, seeing most of the parts, and especially keeping in mind conservation and nature, what do you think at the moment? I mean, we have to speak about it. Rhino poaching is obviously on everyone's mouths and tongues at the moment. Except for that, and what's being done for that, what do we don't know about? What do the people miss regarding conservation that we don't normally
Mm,
think about for the broader public? Because I think there's a lot of things that people don't normally speak about or don't think about when they
mm.
go into nature and speaking about conservation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, the first thing I would probably say is that conservation has become this very kind of like one-dimensional term, and especially with Africa. And I think that's a bit of a problem. So I think like what a lot of people will think about with conservation is rhino poaching or big five or safari, like those kind of like that kind of conservation, um, which makes it in some ways like a little bit inaccessible to most because people just don't really know what conservation is outside of that. So I think one of the big things about conservation is that it's so much broader than that. It's so like conservation and like is biodiversity. It's protecting and preserving biodiversity at the most basic level. So conservation is kind of all around us. So that's what I
Mm,
think is like is a big narrative with Conservio and with really using tourism as a vehicle to drive conservation, but not just seeing conservation as wildlife in the Kruger National Park, but looking at it as your forests, your mountain areas, your
mm,
riverside, kind of like open farmlands and stuff where you are essentially preserving nature and trying to keep it in its most natural state. But you need to be incentivized to do so. So you build business around that, and that is what we really want to support. So I think the main thing um, is with conservation in general is that it's a lot broader and it's a lot simpler than just this kind of like rhino poaching and conservation and really like protecting areas against anti-poaching units and all of that. It's a lot more accessible, and I think that's the narrative that we really want to create, is that there are ways to kind of contribute to conservation in that sense. But I think also just on that point is that conservation is also, wildlife and biodiversity is one part of it. In order for conservation to be successful, there is a holistic approach. And,
mm,
there is the biodiversity protection, which could be from your rhino to your bees or whatever it might be. But then there's also this idea of like, you need to build commerce, viable businesses around conservation for that to kind of sustain itself and make sense. Then you need to take into account community and culture and kind of like local supply chains. All of that needs to make sense for conservation to work, and especially for conservation to kind of work at scale, or not even at scale, but long term, for us to have long term solutions for conservation. So I think that's very much the way that I like to look at conservation, and that we try to approach it as well.
Do you think? You spoke about knowledge of the environment and it actually being more simple than we think it is. It's not
Mm.
just rhino poaching, it's actually much more simple and a much more holistic approach. Do you think that Conservio, with tech, with conservation, with the environment, is busy looking at a model where it's not only about getting away, getting into nature, but also educating the people around them to be able to conserve what's around them, to be able to conserve the nature that's around them? Because it's not only about wildlife, as you rightly say, it's about the plants, it's about everything around you that consists of nature. That's what it's about. Do you think that's something that, with the tech side, that Conservio is busy moving towards to, or what's your plans?
Oh, sorry, I lost you there for a second. But no, absolutely. You are 100% right. So I think our kind of beachhead into conservation is we want to make it easier for people to discover and access nature-based getaways. So that's on the customer side. We want to make it easier for you to get out of nature, so you are incentivized, so you want to book your getaways into nature. And then for our properties, that drives more revenue to the right type of properties. Because just with Conservio as well, we're obviously a marketplace, we're a booking platform for getaways to nature. What's kind of different with us is that we strip away all the noise. So we only work with vetted properties, quality properties who are underpinned by the same kind of drive for impact and preserving their natural surroundings. So that's kind of the landscape. So on the one side, we want to make it easier for people to book, but then on the other side, we want to drive more and funnel revenue to the partners who are doing this. So that's kind of like the overarching model. But in doing that, it's exactly what you say in terms of really educating people about what conservation looks like. And I think the face of conservation has become the big five and has become rhino poaching or anti-rhino poaching, whatever it might be. And I think that's a very, very important element of it, but it is only one element. And we really want to educate people about what conservation looks like and what it looks like to what nature-based experiences look like, how those work in line with conservation, and really actually just, not shift the narrative, but diversify the narrative around conservation so it actually is seemingly more accessible, so that people understand how, by pure actions, by pure decision making, that they can contribute to conservation. So that is definitely part of our strategy. It's part of the Conservio narrative, and it's really how we want to engage our customers as well.
What's the noise? You said there's noise. What is the noise?
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of noise, I think it's more around booking. So, if I were to say to you now, go and book a safari, go, where do you want to go? You want to go to Shishlui Umfolozi in KwaZulu Natal. Try book that in the current booking platforms, and tell me how difficult that is. You arrive there as someone, maybe you've never been to Shishlui Umfolozi, maybe you don't even know about Shishlui Umfolozi. You go on the booking platform, there's so much information. There are so many properties, there's so much nuance to these bookings, and it's a very, very, for someone that might not know exactly what they want, and remember, that's the type of travel that we're talking about, but I'll go there in a second. Um, it's a very noisy booking experience with a lot of information, a lot of bits and pieces that a lot of people don't understand, which makes it actually a hard booking experience. And I often actually have this kind of experiment with my friends who consider themselves, they travel a lot, they do a lot of traveling, and I'll say, go just book a nice place in the Kruger that you think is that you know that will be good for you and your family. Like, show me how you would do that. And it's actually very difficult. Like, where do you start? How do you know if it's a good place? How do you vet it against the other when you're getting 3,000 properties that are in the Kruger? So that's actually the element that's really difficult, and that's the noise that we want to just strip away. Strip away the noise. We only work with quality, vetted places in nature, and everything there, it's easy to book, it's seamless, it gives you the information you need, and there's a kind of, yeah, it makes that kind of booking experience like, when you think of, I want to get away, I want to have a city escape, you think of Conservio, and they are going to kind of hold you in that experience because it is what you are looking for.
Yeah, I can agree with you. A family of mine was in the Kruger just a while ago, 2 weeks ago. They were in the Kruger for 3 weeks, and it's exactly that. The one hotel they stayed in was they asked the premium, but the train railway line was 500 meters away. So 12 o'clock at night, you have a train bashing through, and you can't sleep. And that's the
Mm.
thing that you're talking about. That's something that someone else won't consider, but you know that, and that's why
Yeah,
maybe that's the reason for you not vetting that place to be on your platform. That's what I
yeah,
understand from noise as well. It's a comfortable
100%.
experience from the start to the end, and that is what you try to do with the conservation of nature in mind as well. And I also
Yeah,
think, taking into account the world we live in today, we have so many social media platforms, so many tech. Uh, Children grow up with phones these days. From when they can start to know it's a phone, they grow up with that, and iPads and everything. So there's a big gap opening up for the education of nature for these type of generations, because that's something that we're going to lose in the near future if we don't educate them now. And I think it's a great platform to be able to make it accessible for someone to go into nature, to book an experience, and also be educated for with something that they're
Ab-
not used to.
yeah, absolutely. And I think like, I mean, across different kind of industries, this idea of like supply chain understanding, that sounds like a complicated word, but just to understand, like, if I'm buying from a certain shop, what is my impact? What am I doing? What am I thinking? People are thinking in this way. People are wanting to understand. And I think that's a difference is that education around, you're staying at this property, this is what you're contributing. And it's fascinating, honestly, to understand what these properties are doing. And they don't showcase it. It's not part of their brand, and it needs to be for people to understand. And I think often what happens is that once someone has visited a property, and they've seen it, then they understand, and then it starts to resonate. But we really want to actually just take the step back and just really showcase, by visiting this property, this is what you contribute. By visiting that property, this is your impact. So that there really is that education around travel can be very, very impactful if it's done the right way. And I think the hard thing, of course, as well, is that with CO2 and this big kind of focus on carbon emissions, travel is getting a bad rap, and travel and for very good reason. But we want to just really make sure that people are understanding where travel and tourism and local tourism and visiting these kind of surrounding areas, it is still very impactful. So that's also just like an education piece that we want to make sure that we bring in. But yeah, just quickly on the noise again, just one step backwards as well, is the existing platforms were built when people knew where they were going. Like, I'm going to New York City, I need to book a hotel, and I'm going to get there on the metro, and there I go. Or I'm going to Swellendam, I need to book a house. Okay, and I've got that kind of landscape, and it's easy. Whereas this type of travel, nothing was built for this type of travel. No online booking platform exists just to focus on getting out to nature. And we have it. We have these type of properties and places to stay in abundance. But nothing is optimized to make sure that people know how to get there. And that is really, really, really the opportunity that we see, is just making it easy to get there, to book it, to find it, and it's catered to exactly what you're looking for.
When I go and I book into one of these lodges or one of these places that you have on your platform, do the people want me to ask questions when I'm there, or do they want me to experience it as I experience it without asking too many questions? What's the mindset of these people doing this type of work?
I think they absolutely would want you to ask questions. I think I mean, and I know there's so much behind the scenes work going on that, I mean, when you ask, for instance, one of your guide or your walking guide or one of the staff members or one of the general managers to tell you a little bit more, you'll be met with a lot of enthusiasm. It's exciting to kind of like open up the hood and show what goes into these places, whether it's water treatment plants, whether it's solar systems, whether they've like just gone onto electric vehicles, or they've got this really, really cool staff village with a school, and how they've kind of brought the whole kind of holistic system in. No, I think very much so. If you want to engage, you'll be met with a lot of enthusiasm. Because, and I think this is what I love about this industry as well, is that you are working with people that love nature. They're bought in. They love nature. They love wildlife. They love kind of the area that they live in. They're quite um, they live in celebration of it. So it's a very like you meet with a lot of passion. And I find that's what's very cool about tourism as opposed to other industries, is that there is a lot of passion around it. So often you'll be met with that, which I think if people want to engage, there's a huge willingness to meet that.
It seems to me that it's not. It's when you speak about nature, when you speak to the layman about nature, they think of trees and birds and animals walking around. But the way you state it now is that it is actually a much more technology, engineering. There's much more thought going into it than just what's around you. There's a back end of this that you don't see, and that's what you guys try to push out there, is to say, listen, there's so much going into being able to give what these people give. Is that true? Is it something that so many tech and engineering is going into this type of thing?
Yeah, and I mean it obviously differs across the board. So you've got there's a whole spectrum of places and how they are preserving their natural areas, and some are super tech enabled and amazing technology that goes into keeping things in their most natural state, because essentially that is conservation, is that we are trying to preserve biodiversity and in keeping it in its natural state. We really want that. That's the goal. So it looks very different across the board. But yeah, absolutely, the technology behind this, I mean, it's astounding. Um, and but I think where you are 100% right as well, is that it's the nature and the animals and the plants and the trees is what we can enjoy because of everything that is happening behind the scenes. So I think that is a very important thing to understand, is that we get to enjoy these wild natural spaces, huge landscapes, wildlife experiences, all of that, because we've got all of these elements working together. And how that looks across the board is very different. And that is whether they've built a business, whether they've got this kind of community engagement, implemented a lot of technology to enable solar panels, enable water treatment, enable kind of the whole conservation AI part of it. But it's the sum of a lot of different parts, and very important parts that come together for us to be able to enjoy it. And I think that is really, really cool to understand.
Do we think enough about, speaking about biodiversity, do we think enough about the micro level thereof? What's beneath the ground? Do we think enough about over extraction of groundwater? Do we think enough about the conservation of the water in dams?
Mm.
Getting the algae levels lower, getting the bad micro levels lower, the treatment thereof. Do we think enough about that, or do we just focus on the end product?
Mm. Yeah, I think, I mean, a lot of the thinking is changing. I think people have a lot more of a better understanding of how fragile and sensitive these ecosystems are. Something can be happening over here that is affecting a very, very natural process over here. So I think those kind of things, like there is a much deeper level of understanding now. But still, I mean, I don't think with conservation, I don't think with sustainability or anything that we are ever thinking enough. I think that's always the thing right now. Is that you're trying to move at such a rate to keep up with consumption and to keep up with this huge amount of pressure on these natural landscapes. I mean, that's the thing. Population, pressure on natural landscapes. It's a recipe. That's kind of where we sit at the moment. Um, but I think there is a much better understanding now of how fragile these ecosystems are, and that you cannot kind of plug a hole hoping that another hole is not going to reappear. We need to think of long-term, multifaceted solutions across the board. And that approach is definitely very, very relevant and very apparent in conservation at the moment.
Let's link into that. What are your top three concerns? Might be South Africa, it might be over Africa, it might be globally, regarding conservation at the moment.
Mm. Well, I think, I mean, I'll definitely start off with saying that Africa does amazing conservation work. I think we are like one of the most pioneering conservationists. If you think about our population, number one, the fact that we have been able to preserve these massive tracts of land and wildlife and rare species that we have been able to do, that says a huge amount about conservation in Africa. So I think there's something really, really to be proud of. And I think we are seen as quite a beam of light in the conservation space. But in terms of concerns, I think the one would be what I've touched on already is around the narrative being a little bit one-dimensional, and there being a bigger need for us to broaden the conversation around conservation and just understand all the different elements and how that works. I think the second one is, and I think this happens across lots of different industries, but the conservation space is very siloed. It's a lot of different organizations working in slightly different ways to achieve a similar goal, which just always seems a little bit unnecessary. And there seems to be a lot more opportunity for collaboration and for cross-pollination of ideas, or working together in a little bit more of a kind of cohesive way to achieve bigger goals. And you see that happening. I mean, you're starting to see a little bit more collaboration and people realizing that we can't just operate in these silos. In the tourism industry, they're taking down the fences, creating bigger protected areas, banding together, not kind of working in this kind of private way. So I would say that is definitely one of the concerns. And then I think the final one, and this is the one I'm definitely the most kind of passionate about, is around, philanthropy, aid, all of that has played a major role and continues to play a very, very important role in conservation. But we need viable businesses around conservation. We need long-term solutions we need to create economies around conservation. Incentive to protect areas, for areas to stay in their natural state, is crucial in order for us to maintain and to sustain our natural spaces. And I think that's where tourism is an amazing business built on conservation, because it incentivizes us to protect our big five and our wildlife. It incentivizes us to protect huge tracts of land, indigenous forests, mountainsides, ocean wetlands. It really, really, really does incentivize us because we've got a business behind it. We can generate money from tourism that we can put back into the protection of land. We can create local employment. We can upskill. We can do all of that. So I think that is the big thing, is that we need to start really looking at long-term sustainable solutions, but viable business models around conservation for us to and I think we have seen the shift. People are realizing this more and more, and it requires innovation. It requires us to think about how do we use technology, but we need to create businesses.
What's your opinion on the interference of nature? Do you think that there's some parts of nature that we shouldn't interfere with as humans at all? Or do you think it's necessary to stick our fingers everywhere and see if we can make it better? Or is it just good as it is?
I mean, I think, yeah, it's a very good question. And I think interference, yeah, in terms of, yeah, so like interference, I think if nature can stay as it is without any interference, then absolutely we should not. I don't think there's any reason for us to interfere in any way if that can sustain itself and it can operate in its way. However, I think part of it is that we're seeing that it can't.
Mm.
Suddenly you've got a beautiful forest, and suddenly, if it makes no sense, and it makes more sense for us to cut down trees and sell timber, that is happening across the continent and across the globe. So, but I do think there is a level of interference, and I do want to emphasize that there is a very good way of tourism, and then there is a very bad players in tourism, and and tourism is not a perfect solution. So if I'm just talking about interference also from a tourism level, tourism is not a perfect solution. I think the players that are doing it really well can be an amazing solution with what we kind of have, and they can create incredible impact. And but obviously, I think if it's like the true kind of naturalist in me would always answer being like, if we didn't have to interfere, let's not. Unfortunately, the realist recognizes that there is a level that we might need to, but let's do it the right way. And let's get the right players in and do it in keeping with certain practices and principles that really can try preserve as much of it in its most natural state, but sustain it by creating a business or creating something viable around it.
I think it's interesting because if you think about it, um, you don't want to interfere if that's the decision. You don't want to interfere at part B, but at part A, which is the upstream part, that's actually indirect interference into that part, which then needs direct interference because of either the positive or negative effect that it has. And that's, I think, one of the problems that we sit with is that it's not always a holistic, as we said earlier, approach. You don't think
Mm,
what you're doing at part A is going to influence in part B and have a larger influence in part C. And that's the problem that we currently sit with, in my opinion, is that we need to identify the origin. And then
yeah.
from there we can derive solutions to actually make the impact less impactful at origin A,
Mm.
downstream. That's just what I think, from looking at it from my way. What's the future for Conservio? Taking into account that, what's the future? What's your main aim for Conservio? Obviously, you have the accommodation. It's a booking platform. You have all of these different ideals that you pull into the business. What's the one thing that you look forward to in future with Conservio?
I think the we want to be a relevant, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's also a bit of a problem in conservation and tourism is that there's a lot of people wanting to reinvent the wheel. There are very good players in this industry, existing players who are doing very well. So we want to be a very relevant booking channel for our partners. So for us, it's not around just scraping the surface and like a couple of bookings here and there, but it's about becoming a very relevant strategic partner that is driving additional revenue to the bottom line so that these properties can create the impact that they are impacting. So they can improve what they are doing. So I think that is how we see it. It's around, and that's why we're curated. We don't want to go mass. We want to work with the properties we work with in such a way that we're driving real impact with them. And our impact is, of course, funding the right amount of revenue, increasing their revenue, and being a very good distribution, a very good booking channel to them so that they are able to create more viable business and they're able to create the impact on the ground. So I think, yeah, we like when we think of Conservio and kind of it's what I mentioned earlier is we want to be on the customer side is the place to book. And then on the property side, this is our main booking channel. This is one of our main revenue drivers is the bookings through Conservio.
What are the hurdles that you currently struggle with, looking at the business and looking at the industry? Is there stuff that hinders you from dropping the numbers down to your bottom level and putting that through? Is there funds that's dissipating in between to things that you didn't look at in the start? What are the hurdles that you struggle with in this industry?
I think on the industry side, it's quite a fragmented industry. It's not a one size fits all at all. Southern Africa completely different to East Africa from a market perspective, from a property landscape, from the technology they use. And then even within regions, they've got different seasonality, different rate structures, different payment terms, different cancel. Like everyone does something a little bit differently. So as a tech platform that is looking to achieve scale and really be able to do things on a scalability level and kind of move at that pace. Getting to grips with how fragmented and how different everything operated was definitely a challenge that we didn't foresee at the beginning. Um, but yeah, it's one that we now on the other side of, having kind of burnt our fingers a little bit trying to understand it. But I think the fragmentation of it is a challenge, and it's not as simple as saying, okay, well, this works here, it will work there. Going into every region, you need to have a little bit of a different approach. And because there's also different booking habits, customer habits with how they will book a safari in South Africa or a cabin in South Africa than how they would book that in Tanzania. So I think that's the kind of hurdle we see on the business and industry kind of level. And then I think as well, I mean, this is also an industry that, especially if you're thinking about kind of nature-based tourism, it's an industry on one side, so you've got all the cabins and cottages and all of that. That's quite new. It's quite new in the way that this is like being brought into the tech landscape, and now it's available to us. So that's quite new. And then on the other side, with safaris and kind of like travel throughout Africa, it's an old industry that's operates in the same way for a long time. So you're kind of juggling these two different players who have different needs and different kind of appetites for different types of technology or ways of looking at things. So it's really about kind of understanding that. But what has been, in a way, like kind of a rainbow and kind of in the dark clouds of rain, is that COVID was a massive, massive shock to this industry and really, really shook it in the sense of we cannot keep doing things the way that we're doing. We cannot be one-dimensional in our approach. We need to embrace change, embrace technology, embrace a new way of thinking. And that is where we have seen so much kind of like people being so like receptive of Conservio. Is this being like we've kind of gone and be like, we want to do things differently. We want to strip away the noise. We want to make bookings easier. We want to bring you into a digitized space. We want to make the discovery easy, and this is how we're going to do it. And that's actually been met with a lot of excitement. So I think that's where, yeah, it's a complex industry, and it's got all these different kind of facets, but it also does kind of breed opportunity as well. I think it's an industry that there's still a lot that's untapped and that can be uncovered.
I want to get into the closing part, and I want to speak with you about entrepreneurship. Talk to me about it. What was your journey? Just go with it, flow with it, and tell us about your journey in that.
Yeah, I think entrepreneurship is definitely something that I stumbled upon more than it was something that was very much like, this is, like some people are like, yeah, I just always wanted to kind of like build a business. It's something that I stumbled upon alongside my co-founder, Justin, but it now feels like something I always would like. It feels like an absolute no-brainer that this is kind of where I would have ended up. Um, but yeah, I think that how Justin often puts it, which I really, really like the kind of narrative, is that, if you've got a problem and you think of a solution, you can build a business out of that. And I just love that concept. I love the idea of building a business, and then you tag on technology, and now you can suddenly build something impactful. So I think for me, I just always like had this thing with conservation, but I didn't like, I didn't I didn't want to, the tourism space, there wasn't something I could really see inside of that yet. So like creating and building Conservio has just been so exciting to be able to like really apply that kind of like entrepreneurship, building business, putting together building blocks to solve something, and something that I care very deeply about. Has been amazing, has been an amazing journey. I think the big thing about entrepreneurship is that it's definitely a journey, not a destination. Um, and I think that's actually something I'm now realizing a lot more than I think I realized maybe 4 years ago when I stumbled into it. Um, 4 years ago, we were so clear on what we wanted to build. My co-founder and I we got introduced during COVID via email. We had one call. We spoke about what we wanted to build, which was then called Conservation Club. We had one call the next day, and we spoke about our values. That was it. We spoke about kind of like a business idea, our values, and like what building a business would mean to us. The next day, we registered the company. He was living in Uganda. I was living in South Africa. We didn't see each other for a year and a half. We just, that was it. We like embarked on it. We started building Conservio. So it was like this amazing thing. It really did feel like we just kind of like stumbled into it, and now it feels like, so much part of what we do and who we are. But I think like back then we were so like, we've always been so clear. Like even the other day we were looking through all our messages and how we kind of had thought about Conservio, and it's very much what we are doing now. There's been a few little changes here and there, but the end goal is the same. But in being so clear about what that end goal looks like, I think you forget about the journey a little bit. And it does feel like we've kind of, bulldozed our way through. Like we've like, okay, we did this. Now we're going to do this. Now we've achieved that. Yes, yes, yes. Whereas I think now we actually are taking time to just celebrate, and really like every day is an achievement. Every day is a new thing being met. And yeah, so instead of it being like, okay, that's where we need to get to, it's been about actually like living in this journey. And really just like taking notes of all of these cool things that are happening on a daily basis. So yeah, it's definitely, there's huge challenges, of course, but I think, yeah, it's something I love. And I think like it's also part of, I think the sporting thing, which we mentioned earlier, has been like a very big kind of like part of that, as well as this like not being a stranger to hard work, or not being a stranger to, you got a very good understanding of that the reward is going to be a sum of the input, and how willing and how hard and how much where you're willing to go with it, I think is where you start feeling it. And both Justin and I and our whole team, in fact, are very much bought into that. Is that, there's an element of luck, right time, right place, and then it's all just hard work. And I think that's we still get very excited about that. You can ask me in a couple of years if I'm still excited about it, but at this point, it's still the thing that gets us going.
Lara, thank you. I think that's a beautiful way to close off and to leave everyone with. Is that it's hard work. It's not a peg in the sand. It's a journey, and you're never going to stop. You're never going to get to where you want to be. I think that's it's always in growth. I think to keep
Mm.
growth in mind, you always want to grow. You always want to change. You always want to go forward. It's a dynamic thing. It's not stationary, and that's a beautiful way to leave the listeners with. We're definitely going to speak again. We'll get you on again, and we'll hear how it goes and how the conservation part of things goes. Thank you for joining us, Lara. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Ettienne. Yeah, this has been great. Cool. We'll chat soon.
Cheers.